So we'll begin. Hello, welcome to episode 2. I'm Steven. Before he can introduce himself as he wishes, which we had no comments on the possible name for him, so he's allowed to choose his own name again. I will apologize for the sound being off a couple of times. I think it was because I had my mic down here away from me, so it's probably my fault. So apologies on that. Again, one of the things that we're learning and trying to pay attention to the things that you all feedback that you give. So Stephen, this is episode 2. Our topic today that we will somewhat stay to or go away from, but then circle back, hopefully at least, is creativity. It's pretty broad, so it might inspire different topics later as we go. So anyway, this is
Zarathustra.
Creative. I like it. And for you that don't know, where would you want them to start exploring this name? With the actual Iranian thinker?
No, I jump right into Nietzsche. Get confused and angry.
There you go.
Then go look up.
Right. Get confused and angry, and then not know what the hell's going on, and then maybe creatively decide what you think it is, but then go actually look it up and be like, oh, that's what it meant all along.
And that was kind of my introduction to Nietzsche in a way that back in the day when I did weird things, now I don't do that anymore because God noticed at some point.
I think you do weird things still.
But I used to, even though I didn't need to, I would often take the Greyhound bus because it is so bizarre. And you get to scratch the underbelly of the world. And I'd always carry the portable Nietzsche with me. And I didn't make it very far in it. I would endlessly reread those Zarathustra.
Which is about what?
And God is dead, sort of thing.
85 pages or something?
Yeah, it's not that long.
It's a short one. You can do it in a ride.
But whatever would happen that I'd read in it, something weird, usually the person sitting next to me, would do something which played right into it.
Oh, yeah.
So all of my Nietzsche is through the filter of riding in a Greyhound bus.
Which, y'all don't know, might be important, became his doctoral or his doctorate dissertation. So that was your dissertation, right? Was on Nietzsche.
No, it was on Newton.
Newton, that's where it was. It was another.
I couldn't write on Nietzsche. I like him more than.
Didn't you write something on him though too?
Yeah, I've got something published out there on Nietzsche.
Yeah, that's what it is. That's what I'm thinking of. About how he actually was dead and his sister was parading him around still, right? And then even though he was no longer living,
they screwed him.
Yes, he believed in his philosophy so much he just stopped living.
And that was my take on it. I just flipped it. Everybody looks at those last 3 letters that he wrote as madness in his last 10 years, as atypical syphilis, which they won't even give him normal syphilis. Atypical. And I'm like, well, what if we take
I don't think he would settle for normal syphilis.
No, it would have to be atypical.
The cool stuff, yeah.
And it was all based upon maybe he visited a brothel once and managed to get syphilis. Maybe. Now it would make sense that would happen to him and he'd go, yes, this is the way the world works. I love my fate. And he would brood productively over his atypical syphilis for the rest of his life. That's a possibility.
Okay.
But that would still make those last 3 letters sane.
Right. If he's in it would be sane to him and sane to the context.
The irony of his last letter, which is, if I remember it, I quote it directly, my dear friend Overbeck was a buddy of his, kind of gave him money and all this stuff, thought he was pretty smart. My dear friend Overbeck, I am a man who pays my debts. For example, today I am having all the anti-Semites shot. Signed, if I remember right, Dionysius.
That's a bold statement.
It's a bold statement, especially because his ideas became, in a lot of ways, the intellectual basis of Nazism under, the auspices of his sister and his brother-in-law. Part of that is he's so saturated in irony, just like Plato. And Plato cannot be read at one level. Plato implodes with irony. And I think you see the same thing in Nietzsche. And sometimes it's overt, like his section in one of his books, which is entitled "Why I Write Such Popular Books," when he clearly doesn't.
Right. Do you think it was like, didn't he write at some point, "I don't write for my contemporary philosophers, because they're too stupid, basically. I write for the future philosopher in hopes that they could catch up to me."
Yeah. Yes.
Do you think that was tongue-in-cheek, or do you think that he was, in that moment, being
I think it was
rather
both.
sincere?
I think it was both. There was a little tongue-in-cheekness there. But I think he saw himself as one of the greatest thinkers, at least of his time period. He knew that. His mentor knew that.
So wouldn't that make him less likely to go to a brothel? To have that kind of feeling that, like, you're that great, but then you would have to pay for sex? Like, wouldn't he think it would just be, or would he want to pay for sex just because, like, then you have to deal with it?
I could see him wanting the experience.
Okay. So maybe syphilis from a brothel still.
Maybe. It just seems unlikely. Especially if you look at the one great love of his life, Lusame, who would be the opposite of the uneducated whore. She is a genius. And she rejects him. Which tears him up, but he never says anything but good stuff about her. But he doesn't seem like the whorehouse hopper. And for one thing, that for a man whose central idea was power, he's the weakest human being I think I've ever.
Insecure, maybe.
No, physically weak.
Oh, physically weak?
Yes. I think he was actually pretty secure. If you really,
I mean, I guess so. It would be, there would be a security in.
They could never diagnose what was wrong with him, but he certainly was sick. Severe migraines, nephritis. I mean, it just a whole listing of very real disorders. And of course, we're looking at late 1800s, so God knows you're probably better off not going and seeing a physician. There was discussion at one point of him going to, I think it was Bloor, if I remember right, for psychoanalysis, the early version. This is pre-Freud. But he actually got too physically ill to make the initial trip. That's why that remarkable book and remarkable movie, Nietzsche, Wept. It is basically saying, what if he would have gone and worked with Bloor?
Right. And that was Yalom.
Yeah.
Right? And that's, so was Brewer a contemporary of Freud, or was he a little ahead?
A little bit ahead, more of the almost a grandfatherly type.
Okay.
But was overlapping with Freud. That whole bunch of them were. They were all in neurology, and in some ways making the same kind of discoveries. If you want to call it hysteria, they were all finding a loss of physical ability and nothing physical that they could point it to. You see so many during that period working on that. Most of them not coming out of heavy philosophy, but out of medicine. That was their default. There has to be a physical cause.
Right.
And when we can't find that, we're not going to go back and say it's.
We'll make something up like a floating uterus.
Yeah.
Because that medically obviously is real. I still think it's hilarious. and I've talked to so many people about how you have one of those early prehistoric vibrator where we used to, there's a little bit of creativity in that, I think, right? How are we going to treat women? Let's blast a water cannon at their vulva, or, maybe they just need an orgasm. And so let's make a device. Before that, did they just manually masturbate?
Yeah, they would manually
masturbate.
So, and it was
weird
appeared in the literature
for women, but not men.
I think what the doctors were that they were experiencing carpal tunnel syndrome. And so
another unhappy I tell you what.
Kind of like the guillotine, which looks like a terrible device, but was actually created for humane reasons.
Right.
The vibrator was created for humane treatment of doctors.
So they didn't have to. Well, we've done this for 4, maybe not. It's like the chainsaw was originally developed to help for doctors who were delivering babies. So they had this little version of it that they would like saw into women.
Oh my God.
And then it became like, what? Why? Why? Like, we don't use any of these devices on men. Like, I have never heard of a story of a man going to a therapist and saying, no, like, just could you jerk me off? And then I'll feel better.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's just, no. Oh, will you do it to my wife? Be like, oh, sure. Yeah. So that's the standard treatment. Like, bring her in. And then they always sold everybody of like, oh, this has nothing to do with sexuality. We don't enjoy this.
No,
but it's the only way we'll treat a woman.
And the mechanization of it. Because with the ancient Greeks, it was what the diagnosis was hysteria. But a man was supposed to pin that uterus down with a penis. So you were actually saying the treatment here is having sex. Now we get 2,000 years, 2,500 years later, and the treatment is we have a machine.
Obviously, men aren't fitting the bill. Here we have this. And then, from there, this so many years later, now it can play music and light up. So progress. That is creative progress happening real time. My God. Well, we mentioned we didn't talk about sex last time. It didn't take us long this time.
It comes back to it. Yeah.
And this is one of the things, like, everybody wants to hate Freud for saying, but is he wrong? We are, and I get that, like, we have asexual folks and we have folks, yes. And I know that sex is a problem for a lot of people, and that's definitely true. And I understand that, but sex and sexuality are essential to our understanding of who we are and our self-concept. That's why Maslow put it at the lowest rung of the hierarchy of needs, before intimacy, right? These are, what's wrong with saying that most of it is kind of related to function?
I think where people make the mistake, it's that linear thinking. There's the base, sex, and then there's the superstructure, consciousness, and they're trying to draw a direct line to that. When in fact, it's not a direct line. It's layers and layers and layers
of a winding road that gets that doesn't get to that, but that it begins to include that.
Yes.
So it's not like this goal is to get to this goal is to get to that goal, but it's as you move up through all the complications of living, then this will become a part of the journey also.
Exactly. This is the initial animal impetus, the energy, if you will.
Yeah.
And when the human comes in is when we begin to transform that. We're still the animal. I realize this about just what a savage I am in what appears to be a very intellectual activity, writing, especially critical writing, and reading. My first read is erotic. I'm open. I want it to work. Now, I'm describing reading somebody like Foucault. I'm an erotic read. Gabriel, you're getting a hard on. My mind is, not my fucking body, for heaven's sakes. But what I'm doing is I'm being open, taking pleasure in it. That's the first one. That's Eros. I'm dropping all barriers, all criticism. I am being vulnerable. I do that, then my next read is Thanatopic. I am brutal. I give no inch. I am attacking. I am killing. I'm going for every assumption that is made. Now, somewhere in between the two, the combining of that openness and vulnerability to these other ideas and other truths, to that aggressive attack and protection from that, somewhere between the two of these is what comes out. The critique. To try to reduce that down to just sex and death is missing the point. But to deny that it's a kind of participation in both is also stupid.
Yeah. Participating in only either, right, is just that narrow view. If I'm going to only read it as an erotic, well, then you're imprisoned by the erotic nature of things, and you're not going to go further. To do it only xanthophobic, then you're only looking to destroy and dismember. You're not bringing those two things together as a streamlined way of seeing what could be. Right? Like that's the move from these are these two forces.
Exactly.
Focusing here is a problematic move, but together, which I think is what Maslow's talking about, the togethering of those things, not the separate, is the path to our ultimate self-actualization and understanding of what we can be, which, I mean, I touched on a little bit last time with saying, are we going to leave it in the flat, or are we going to look at it in the other dimension of how far can I go? Not how much farther am I better than you or better than them, but what about me?
What about me?
Am I going to go to my limit? Which I think is essentially an extraordinarily creative effort. I think at the essence, that's the creative, and I think this is one of the reasons also, maybe way back when, I read a paper once where the author had mentioned one of the initial reasons men hate women was their innate creativity.
Yes.
They're a vessel of life in a way that men cannot ever
be.
Get to be. And so men hate that, and they want to control that. And I think also there's the other part of it where, physically, truthfully, women can have sex, which is, again, I would say sex is a creative environment. I mean, even two men having sex is a creative environment. No, it's not creative for creating a life, as in a new life, but it would be creative as creating a life together,
creating that kind of intimacy.
So that is again creative force. So sex would be that, and once again, women can outperform men in sex. They can have sex all day. I wouldn't recommend it. I think there would be bruising and pain and problems with it for sure, but they can.
They can.
Whereas men cannot. We cannot participate in that creative moment as often.
And can't take nearly as long a pleasure in it. Yeah,
Right.
Go back to the Greeks, Tiresias, who'd been both, and he's asked, which gets more pleasure out of sex, male or female? And he's like, well, that's a no-brainer, female. You see it in the tantric tradition.
Which is why men don't try it.
Yeah.
It's why it's a 2 pump and done.
When a woman has an orgasm, it's a whole new day at life. For us, the Egyptians called it the little death. I'm like, yep.
Yeah, that's fair.
I'm ready to die, and now you're ready to take over the world. Oh, geez.
When you bring up death in that context, wasn't it? I'll probably mispronounce the name. Sabina Spielrein, right? I'm probably butchering the shit out of that name. Who wrote the paper that Freud stole and created Thanatos as an idea for sexual gratification, but she initially said, in the moment of sex, a woman has the option of dying and giving herself free reign to become what the moment needs or what she wants to be in the moment. Whereas, she has to keep up the facade day to day, But in that moment, it's a death. It's a death of that self that you're building to become.
That's it. It's that very interesting book, Psychoanalysis in a New Light, where the author is arguing one of the biggest mistakes made was when psychoanalysis emerges, turn of the century, not 2000, but 1900, the same time in philosophy is emerging phenomenology. The philosophy of consciousness and the psychology of unconsciousness are coming out at the same time, and they're not talking to each other
At all.
And he said, if the two would talk to each other and understand the metaphoric nature of even talking about something like conscious and unconscious. But anyway, he talks about this. My favorite quote of any academic book, and I memorized it at first glance, was right out of his book, and it was, "We have not been taking orgasm seriously enough!" Exclamation point. And I read that and I go, yes, I didn't say that. But then he explains. He said that at the moment of orgasm, we lose the self.
Yes.
That's a moment of that kind of dissolution, with the possibility, as you're saying, of a reconfiguration, a new growth, a recognition of the constructed nature of the self in the first place.
Freedom to just build. We wipe the slate clean. Now, if we're engaged in a culture where we teach that only the male counterparts are going to see that, and that it's not their responsibility to help their partner get to that stage of having an orgasm, or the other side of that, where you have this participant in a heteronormative kind of relationship saying, well, I'm a slut for doing this, or I'm worried about how my body looks when I'm doing this, and all the insecurity that the society pushes into the moment, then they're not free to enjoy it. They're not free to get the benefit from it. They're not, they're less likely to have an orgasm, right? So I think, what is it? The statistics are like 60% of women identify as having an orgasm at least some of the time with their partner. Whereas in a female-female couple, it's over 80. It almost matches the frequency at which men claim to have an orgasm in a heteronormative relationship. And so, again, I think there's so much stigma that we're pulling people out of enjoying it and appreciating it and respecting it, not taking it seriously. And then we're creating, as Adler, I think one of the people that we don't mention enough and for some reason skip over too easily is Adler, who his whole work was about insecurity.
Yeah.
And even in psychology, when, cognitive behavioral therapists aren't going to talk to humanists and aren't going to talk to this, and we're all lobbying for our position to be significant so that we can get funding or whatever the case may be. But that's just insecurity. It's insecurity within, which is no different than somebody who likes this team versus another team, and they're insecure about. Insecurity is the root of what destroys all of us.
Yeah.
And you can't be creative when you're insecure.
Yeah.
You're going to lose that, because insecurity thrives on the essential nature of being insecure.
Yeah.
Being vulnerable enough to say, hey, this is who I am. Well, I mean, in some context, what we're doing right now, okay, you can shit on us all day long. You can find ways. But we're at least attempting to engage a space and offer our views on things, which might be creative or not, or might be compelling or not, and leaving it open. Why do we insulate ourselves from that moment? Because those are always the moments that enrich us.
And accept, as Adler would say, that difference between inferiority feelings and inferiority complex.
Yes.
That we're given, it's the nature of the world. That we come into the world, as he says, a stranger in a strange land, about as useless a piece of protoplasm out there, the most dependent thing, surrounded by giants. Right. So the initial message the human gets is, I am inferior. How the hell am I going to do this? But built within the human is, he said, you start to see it as early as age 4. This mapping out of a life. Well, maybe I can't be superior at everything, but my God, there is something. There is a talent in me what I could achieve.
Mm-hmm.
And so he sees that basis of our destruction Is in that inferiority complex. The basis of our creation is in that inferiority feelings.
Because we have to do something to absolve this conflict we feel, which is no different than what Freud was talking about when we're trying to satiate our drive. So I think one of the drives, I don't know if Freud would agree that it's an id drive, would be the artistic effort of creativity and trying to solve a problem in a creative way. But it is a drive that we do have, and I think satiating that is important. And when we don't do that, then we kind of spiral into a bad place. And we all have to do it. Like so when you haven't done that for such a long time, where you've not been allowed to, same way with when we're looking at taking away school programs that are supporting the arts, or we act as if everything, even in psychology, could be whittled down to a biological something, versus understanding that sometimes it's a composite of that. It's a bio and an emotional base or psychological base, which it always, one of the videos I always show all my students, so I make them watch it a couple of times. It's a very short video that Richard Alpert gave, right, prior to becoming Ram Dass. And he said, when he was talking about the LSD experience, which, that's a whole thing or whatever it is. But he said, man has come out of a jungle where there wasn't enough, and we were taught to fight for everything because resources were limited. And we built an ethic around that. So we have to have competition. So now I have to fight with you all the time. The problem is, and this is over 60, 70 years ago, we now know there's enough to go around. We don't have to engage that ethic anymore.
That's right.
We can now develop a new ethic of collaboration.
That's what they got.
And that's a creative thing, but we're afraid of it.
We're afraid
socially.
Of it.
We won't do this. Right now, we see all the anti-DEI campaigns and all the other shit, which is moving away from the progress we've made to push us back into this ethic of no. And you have the same people talking about white replacement and replacement theory and all the other crap. It's just bullshit. It's bullshit to keep our brains back where they were, because progress is over here where we have been moving towards.
Yeah.
More people at the table, I would call that progress. More people's voices being heard, I would call that progress.
I call that progress.
And now we're moving back, which is a destruction of creativity. Creativity has gotten us where we are.
I worry about where we're going.
Extremely. I don't think this is acting on our base feelings. When we get back to now, it's the worst thing. I forget his name. Well, actually, I don't forget his name. I refuse to remember his name. This is it. But I think he's some news person, whatever, on Fox or something like that. And his name in his social media account says alpha male. Like, here's how I know you're not an alpha male. You self-identify as one. Like, this is 100%. That would be like me saying I'm the greatest basketball player to ever live. Michael Jordan doesn't have that. His social media doesn't say I'm the best. No, because you don't need to. Other people are saying that. But then one of the posts he said is, I still eat at Hooters. I still do all. And everything was just like the lowest level of mediocrity that we could achieve. And that's supposed to be male, right? Then they had somebody who made fun of Vice President Harris's husband for going grocery shopping with her. And they're like, God. What a beta move. I was like, this is a news channel?
Yeah.
That's not very creative. Like, that joke has been made for over hundreds of years. Like, that's not interesting. And that's the best you have for today?
For today.
It's like our creativity should be better than this.
I feel almost embarrassed for these people.
This is the thing. Where is that creative force?
I hear my mother's voice saying, if you behave like that in public, I will come back and haunt you.
As any decent person would say. Like, what's wrong with you? And then, they had the other guy who said some outrageous things, and basically he was confronted in his home. And where did he was talking about how weak women were and all of that. And where is he now? He's living with his mom. Who took you in? Who saved you? Why didn't you go to some dude or some bro? You know, like where was that at? Because you're weak, you know, and you, who do you go to get nurtured by? The person you don't want to admit you go to, the person you don't want to admit you're being dependent.
Yes.
So yeah, I think in that world, there's very little room for creativity. And when I hear the political sphere right now, I just am not motivated. I'm not motivated. I was, and I had been getting more motivated. But now I don't hear anything that's inspirational.
I'm the same way.
I don't, and I'm worried what that does to our general creativity. You know, like right now, sure, I think we publish more books today than ever by a percentage. But are those books different? Or are they just copies?
Well, and when I read,
where are we at?
You know, we're keeping in our military colleges. You know, these are like West Point and stuff. We're keeping copies of Mein Kampf, but we are taking copies of Maya Angelou's "I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings" out. They are banned.
Right.
That is so obscene.
And where's the great novel coming in 20 years? Is it just going to be some trumped up, like men are supposed to be the rulers of all things and women are supposed to be subservient? And is that the novel?
Is that what we're going to get?
It's already been existing.
A cartoon?
At best. Well, with our attention span, it'll be
it'll be
a novella. Will be Stephen King level. But like right now, we're at this beautiful place where you go to a bookstore and it's full of ideas and creativity. And even if some of those ideas are just like a retelling of another story, there's still there's a really interesting book. I think I've got it right over there. There's a restaurant, and next door to it, there's a pawn shop that exists. And in the pawn shop, you only get into the pawn shop if you need to go into the pawn shop. So you don't know if you need to go. It wasn't your plan. You were just going to get some food, right? And you fall in there, and the pawn shop broker takes your regrets, so you can pawn your regret. And this is amazing to me. Super creative.
Yeah.
I think we've reached this amazing place where all of this creativity is around us. And it seems to be, politically, there's a strong movement to turn our backs on all of those things. Like, I thought we were starting to prove Ray Bradbury wrong.
Me too.
I thought we were starting to prove, and it looks like now, no, there's a force. And so I'm curious, so what happens, right? So we hear Trump is going to run for, a third term. And are people just going to accept that and be idle? Or are we going to push?
If I had to bet, I'd say they're going to let it happen.
That's what I'm afraid of. And then what happens to creativity?
And
who thought we would get political on creativity, though?
I know.
But I don't know how. I don't know how you avoid it.
We're looking at the end, I think, very possibly, of the longest running experiment in Enlightenment government ever attempted on this planet, as far as we know. We are the first. We're the big baby. This was a government not based upon some goddamn God out there giving certain people favors, or whether or not your blood was blue. This was a government of the people, for the people, by the people. They had nothing to go on. They were authorizing themselves. This was absolutely unheard of. And they were worried it wouldn't last.
Right. And I mean, these were also damaged people.
Very damaged.
Who like, the first thing people would say is like, oh, well, you got Thomas Jefferson who raped slaves, and he has this. Yes, that doesn't mean what he wrote wasn't also great.
Exactly.
Two truths can exist in the same space. He wrote for a time that he couldn't live. That doesn't make him a great person for being a coward.
Look at Washington, richest man in the world, could have been king, easy could have been king. He had to say, I will not be king. There will not be a king. He had to do that. Imagine some of our billionaires today.
Right. who were striving just for that
just for
purpose
the
of being
opposite
king.
thing. He's like, I'm not going to do this. This isn't going to happen. And I love it, your comment about writing, not for the people of the day, but for the future. I think they were all doing that.
Yes. Because none of them could be the person. Wait, I shouldn't say that. They could have been the person. They were too insecure to attempt to be the person. Because, I mean, at this time, we have John Brown out there, who's one of the great people of history that we don't talk about enough, I think, who was an abolitionist and fighting, and he fought, I think, George Washington's grandson? I can't remember, in an effort to try to free the slaves, right? So we had active people who were doing that then. And our elected leaders could have been those people also. They just weren't. Even Lincoln, who we always accredit of being like this, he really wasn't about ending slavery for his own purpose.
No, he did not see equality in the way that we do.
Right.
Instead, it was more paternalistic. These are humans, deserve human rights, but they're not capable of taking care of themselves.
Right.
So, we're the paternalists. It was, at the time, very liberal.
but also at the time, revolutionary.
Yeah, very much so.
And so, like, there's negative in all of them, I think. But that doesn't mean there wasn't also greatness, and it doesn't mean there wasn't also value and creativity. And I think that's one of the things is Jefferson was writing in a very creative way to open the possible, and this might be his greatest accomplishment in my book, to open the door for potential further creativity and progress. He wasn't writing for today, for that day. He was writing for today. It looks to be now we're closing all of those doors of progress. And in a stark move the backwards direction. Trying to go back to like pre-civil rights movements and things like that. And so that's what's really kind of problematic to me. And for me, that's what creativity means. Is, are you opening the door to what? I don't write a poem. It was beautiful. I met Ada Limón and went to her and our poet laureate and watched her read, and it's beautiful. And when I was going at the end and having her sign my book, she asked me, have you taken the February challenge? And I was like, I don't know what you're talking about, really, but you're supposed to write a poem a day for the month of February. And I was like, no. I have it. And what's funny is I saw her on April 1st, and she said, you should. That's all it took. And I was like, you know what? If the poet laureate says you should, then I'm an asshole for not. So I've been doing that. Now, none of those poems are going to change the world, but they're opening the door for me tomorrow. And that's opening the door for me later and later for my future progress. The more I'm investing in those times, the more I'm investing in who I am today, gives me potential for tomorrow. It doesn't mean I'm going to actualize that, but it gives me a range. And I think that's the true beauty of creativity, is it gives you another opportunity.
Yeah.
Right.
An acceptance of what you've got and the freedom to mess with it, to reconfigure it. Foucault's comment, one of his last steps, Ethics and Subjectivity, where at the end he's being very interrogative. It's always questions. He asks a question that, is it possible that the day will come when we'll look at these subject positions, male, female, American, whatever they are, and be conscious of them, and then actively choose as an act of creativity. And I read that and I thought, yeah, certainly that was my sense with a lot of young people, more than, say, my generation. Mm-hmm. A slight openness to this, and a lot of things playing into this. I think gaming culture was playing into this. Who are you? Well, let's play.
Right.
What are your powers? Well, let's see. And we'll do math.
Well, and I think that's an important point, because We act as if identity politics don't matter. Oh, it doesn't matter what you identify with. And they mock people for putting their pronouns on things, and they do all of these stuff, right? But what's wrong with that? That person is more accepting of their vulnerability to put themselves out there in the truest sense versus hiding behind catch-all phrasing based on very sketchy kinds of scientific understandings of things. Like, what does it mean to be conservative? What does it mean to be liberal? What does it mean to be this or that? Okay, I was reading today. I read a little bit from Ken Wilber, and he was like, "No, I'm a post-conservative, post-liberal." He said, "I'm tired of the either or. The goal should be, let's take what works from this, and let's take what worked from this, and let's build something better."
See, and that shh, don't tell anybody. It should probably be cut. That's what I was really up to on my dissertation. It took them a long time to figure out what I was doing. I wasn't writing on Newton. I wasn't writing on science. I wasn't writing on epistemology directly. What I was looking at was this tendency to either or everything. We have two fallacies in play with that. We have the two extremes fallacy, and we have the fallacy of the excluded middle. We rarely talk about that excluded middle, where things start to mix.
Mm-hmm. The gray area that is not the black and white. It's easy to talk about.
And seeing that, even in Jung, I saw that either or in that typology. I think that's why I liked Rorschach's work. Rather than you're an introvert or an extrovert, you have these forces in you, introversion and extroversion. And maybe one day you're introverted, another day you're extroverted. He saw introversion, the going deep within, that's how culture was made, not out here. Right. He said the artist goes within, introtensivity, and they create culture. When they bring it back out to us, it's called civilization. It's a creative act like you're talking about.
And then we get caught up in civilization. That takes us to Freud again, where he said, man built civilization to hide from his nature. This insulates me.
Yeah.
So that's me bringing it back out. Now I can insulate me to that point. Now I'm safe in this point. If I go back in and become more creative, now I'm vulnerable again. And I have to project that out. And then that's now a new insulation if it's accepted or not.
You know, I
really think it's an injustice to psych that we don't use Rorschach more.
Yeah.
He was brilliant.
Absolutely. No, and I think we don't use him simply because he was the best looking male psychologist in the history of Western psychology.
I think Brad Pitt has a time machine, went back, was Rorschach, came forward. Like I
joke with my students, about, in history, right? Teaching history. I said, it's all about people. I said, for me, I want to see a human, not just, I said, I'm so caught by ideas, I want to remind myself. And I said, Rorschach, I imagine. And I said, when I first saw a picture of him, I decided, I think I'd like to be gay. And my class laughed. I go, you guys laugh? I put his picture up and they go, oh my God.
He's a good looking guy.
The women are like, if I were male, I'm gay. The men are like, I'm thinking about going gay. That's
as close as you can come to a choice, I think, on the topic. Like he was a beautiful, beautiful man. I actually, behind me, have his original text and his original Rorschach plates.
Oh man!
I sought those out and I was like, no, I want those, just for the history of it, and if nothing else, to archive it. But I think those are the essence of creativity that we're not talking about.
We don't,
and it's hurting us because we're not having the outlet for it.
And that's why I think maybe we're just looking in the wrong area in psych. They may have so fucked it over. That was Bill Fredrickson, the sensei of variables, PhD in stat, as far as I know. And he took me aside one day and he said, Gay, because I'm just so tired of this. Why we can't understand creativity. He said, I cannot imagine a human being who's creative not being creative in all aspects of their life, like we're talking about. He said, but instead we want the output of creativity, but we want you to be hyper normal.
Yes.
And he said the worst people about this are psychologists. Now that coming from a PhD level psychologist.
I think that would really align with, I don't know if you've read this book yet, Behave by Sapolsky. It's beautiful. Because he said, we start to act as if what we were saying earlier, it's a black and white either or kind of world. And I think the real danger of an either or world is we identify with one side and we other the hell out of the other side.
Yes.
Oh, that's the other.
It becomes asymmetrical.
And
and that's why I was trying to put linguistic marking comes into play to this. The binary opposition comes into play with this. I was trying to put it all. I could sense it. And it's at the fundamental nature, I think, of logic. That's the only reason I do not want to study fucking formal logic or people like Kurt Gödel. But I was driven there.
Right.
To try to get to this idea of how, not just what truth is, but how we're actually constructing it and what's at stake in these constructions. The hierarchicalization of knowledge and of people that comes with that.
Right.
Not everybody does that. Not every culture does.
And who's in charge of this? And who
stands to? That's the best question I was given by a teacher. Gabe always asked the question. When you come with your conclusion, who stands to gain and who stands to lose if we accept this as truth?
Mm-hmm.
And boy, he said that to me, and I needed to fucking hear that. Because it wasn't just the quality of the logic and the evidence. It's what is it I'm trying to prove here? What am I setting out to do? And who gets hurt by this and who wins? You start to ask that question, and man, I changed the way I wrote, changed my focus. Always made me ask, if we accept this conclusion and I stand personally to win, I better look a little bit more closely at my conclusion. And if my conclusion means certain people lose, I better look real closely at this.
Make sure it's ethical in the way that they're losing or why they're losing.
Or why they're losing.
Not just random lottery of birth or some bullshit like that's what I was going to say is, so I ask my students every year, every semester, I say, are your parents good or bad people? And they all say good. Good. So I start drawing the normal distribution. Here's this and that. I said, well, what indicates good? And we start having a discussion about it. I said, how much evidence do they have of being good? Like good deeds. How many do they have? And all of a sudden, hands go down. Well, I was like, oh, so we're saying they're good because they didn't kill people. Is that the metric?
Yeah.
And that's that we're losing the center of, no, they just are. They're not good or bad. They just are. Unless they're putting into deeds that you can easily then identify as like, well, that's a good person. I said it's the same thing with grades. If you show up and you do all the assignments I give you, you should get a C. That's what I should build a class that everybody could pass. If you go above and beyond that, you're a B, an A. And that's, again, the normal. So we're trying to act as if I had a student saying this, like, I have to pass this class. And they were on the border between an A and a B. I was like, well, you are passing this class. And they said, no, I need an A. And I was like, well, there's other grades that pass this class. Like, you don't understand. But it was A or F. There wasn't middle ground. And I think that's a problem. When we become so lost that we don't have middle ground, how are we ever going to talk?
Exactly. And how are
we ever going to have creative enterprise?
And how am I going to move incrementally towards something? Am I always going to be perfect or just not attempt? What about that moving forward?
The journey part.
What about the beauty of failure? Oh, man.
If you've never failed, have you tried? That's always we should all fail. And that's the best thing is learning. And that takes us back to that moment of, oh, I'm not enough, or that insecure moment where, okay, I need to do something else. Be creative to get where I want to be. So, okay, I failed, but what am I going to do now to get where I want? That's creativity.
A trick I learned with me, and part of it was studying the narratives of the coyote, was that in some of the narratives, looking at some of the Plains tribes, that one of them said, I can't remember which tribe it was, I think Lakota, they said that coyote is the most powerful, magical being out there. has more power than anyone else. The problem is he has no idea what his powers are, and they only show up when he attempts the impossible. And I started thinking about that in me, and I'm like, Jesus, I have failed a lot of things, but I said, I am consistently choosing the impossible task. And I'm usually very calm. I can't do this. So what? And then I usually beat myself up over it. Professors talked to me about this at OU, that when I was beating myself up one time, and two came to me and they said, Gabe, you were just remarkable. What? They said, we've been talking about, you can find three of the most difficult thinkers that nobody can make sense of for centuries. And you will take all three at once, try to slam them together, and then hate yourself because you don't synthesize. I go, really? I go, you're always trying the impossible. I am. But I accomplish I don't do that impossible thing. Can't get there. I'm not that good. But something happens in between. Something that I would have maybe thought was impossible. Even my running. I'm 50-some years old. I'm a heavy smoker. I got my legs fucked. And I'm lazy. And so I decide I want to run a 4-minute mile. In my 50s, and I haven't run for over 20 years, and I'm not going to stop smoking, and I intend to drink. And so what do? Well, what's the worst thing I ever ran? Uphill, quarter miles, and start running them. And so what I start running them faster and faster. And I'm thinking, I'm going to chain these bastards. I'm starting to run 60-second quarter miles. And my lungs are bleeding. I'm taking shots of whiskey before I run to see what that does. Do I ever run my 4-minute mile? No.
But did you run the best you could?
I ran the best I could, and I ran a lot faster than I thought I was able to.
Whereas if you would have set your goal as, I'm going to run the fastest I can, you wouldn't have got where you were.
And I told somebody who's a heavy runner that I won't mention his name. I said, he said, well, that world record's been broken a long time ago. I said, you're not understanding. I'm an old man. I said, as a kid, that 4-minute mile was a thing. Well, somebody broke that a long time. I said, that you're not hearing me. That's an impossible thing for me.
Right.
When I was a kid, they said it was impossible for the human.
Impossible has two contexts: an individual and an outwardly or a social. Right. So what's impossible for me might be very attainable for you. I often think of my sister. No offense. Math, she feels, was impossible for her. Math was a second nature for me. So she'll come up to a mathematical problem. She's like, this is impossible. Oh, it's very easy for me. I could do that, without a hesitation. But that's where we have to, if I just look at her and go, well, people have done that, then she feels unheard. She's going to recede back, and I'm like, oh, okay, I won't bring up my problem anymore. And that's where we have this. We're also actively building that insecurity thing, that where people aren't there, versus appreciating being vulnerable enough to say, hear your story and say, my God, that's inspiring to me, even though you failed at hitting the 4-minute mile.
And stop this radical individualistic competition bullshit where there's only one winner and everybody else is a total piece of shit loser who should die.
Right.
How many times have I seen this? The person who does something exceptional, but, I got a silver medal. I wasn't the world's best. Therefore, all of my efforts, I'm like, what?
That means you were only one person beat you.
Yeah.
Which, I was reading an article about, it was in a book maybe, about the lead singer of Megadeth, Dave Mustaine, who was originally in Metallica, and Metallica booted him, and he never got over that. And even though he's in Megadeth, which is one of the biggest bands, he doesn't see himself as, and I don't know how accurate that is, as successful because he got booted out of Metallica. Instead of saying, I got booted and then made a band good enough, it rivaled them as one of the greatest accomplishments you could ever get to.
I got booted right into the place I needed to be.
And without getting booted, he probably would have been vulnerable enough
Exactly.
to build this whole thing. And like, for me, I have, you can't see this, but there's a collection of vinyl over there. And one of the things I set off to do was, collect the 100 most influential albums to me. Metallica's not in that list. Megadeth is. They're one of them. For what it's worth, like, I don't know if that helps Dave out, but like, for me, Metallica's a great band, but they had an album that wounded me, and I felt it more, and so I think that goes back to the insecurity thing of just appreciating. I'm not going to write a book to try to be the best book out there. I'm going to write a book to try to say this is the best book I can write.
That's
in this
the
moment,
key.
which is going to open the door for me to grow as a writer, because the more you do it, I love the quote by Stephen King when he was talking about writing. He's one of the things we act as if the art of, or the effort of creativity in art is you sit down and you just manifest it. Like, he just sat down and wrote it. Like, it wasn't a process of years and so many drafts and so much stuff going on. The floor is trash. But he writes, I think he said, like 6 hours a day. He gets up and treats it like a job. And most of that stuff doesn't come to a publisher because it's not good enough. It's process. It's failure.
Yes.
And ponying up enough effort to get back on it and try it again.
Exactly.
And those are what make, we act as if, these people are untouchable, amazing figures. Really, they're just people who are willing to fail again.
And I think that's, I remember one of my professors was telling me that every great writer, and boy, he knew his stuff, he's a lit professor, knew they were great, that was a necessary precondition. And we were talking about various writers, and, the Hemingway, the Faulkner, the Fitzgerald, and I mentioned Norman Mailer, who's a really good writer, but he never quite got it. He goes, he's one that never knew he was great. He was the same way, but he never knew it. And he said, if you study the other ones, at some point they know it. They may be insecure, they may hate their stuff, but they know there's a greatness in it.
Or they would stop doing it.
Or they would stop doing it. I remember cognitive psychologist came here. I wish I could remember his name. It was for OPA, OPS, one of those things. And I know most faculty were ignoring him because he wasn't doing heavy-duty quantitative research. Well, of course not. That's what he started. He was trying to understand excellence in every area. And so trying to come up with a formula just didn't work. So he started doing these deep narrative interviews. And he said, kind of making it up on, is there a pattern across? And he's looking at everything, from artists to plumbers, electricians, novelists. And he said, everything's very different. They're all producing. But he said, one thing came up. And he said, it was like pulling teeth. He said, they all had a sense from a very early age there was something special about them, about their destiny. Not that they were great or better than other people, but there was a fate. It was going to require work, but it was their destiny. That whatever they were going to do, they were going to be great at it. And he said what was so funny was how they didn't want to admit it because they thought that sounded narcissistic.
Yeah.
But he said, in fact, that was the confidence. He said that was the only thing that he could find across all these fields was a sense of personal destiny, and that it wasn't going to be given to you. But if you embraced it, now, the guy we started with, Nietzsche, where does he see choice? Fati or amor fati, however you want to say it. We'd always have a choice in living our fate. That can't be taken from us, he says. He also believes you can't change your fate, and you wouldn't even if you were given the opportunity.
No. A lot of people think they've been handled a bad hand or whatever. And it's another question I ask my students. If you could change anything in your past, would you? And I said, before you answer that, because we all have bad trauma, for sure. any change you make, think of the ripples that it changes going forward. And it's not to say that you should be thankful for all the things that you've survived. But had Viktor Frankl not been in a concentration camp, would he be Viktor Frankl?
Yeah.
Now, should he be thankful to Nazis for that experience? No.
No.
But what he should be thankful for is himself for being in the experience and then deciding to do something with it.
Yeah.
And moving on. That doesn't make him better or worse than other folks who were there, but it makes him more destined.
Yeah, and it's not loving what happens in a concentration camp. That's not what's meant there. That's what you're given. That's the shitty stuff that you want to stop. But if you're given that, which by all rights should just tear all meaning from you, what's he do? That faith that he's given, he pulls out of that one of the most positive views of the human I've ever seen, that keeps track of the greatest evil that humans are capable of. And that was him. And he did give up for a while. There's that process.
I think we all do.
Yeah.
We all will. Because you get too close. You're Achilles too close to the sun. And you're just like, well, maybe I should just stay here where it's safe. And those who become truly great are the ones that say, no, I'm going to go ahead and burn the wings off and fly as close as I can and touch it. Right? Like, I'm going to go and lose this concept of who I am and become who I could be. And that takes a lot to break through. But it's there. And I think that's what all the great ones have done, is just say, I'm not worried if I'm good enough. I'm just going to focus on being this.
Yeah.
And being as much as I can, which goes back to that. Am I worried about comparison, or am I worried about just being the best me? And when you do that and you move to this, you're opening yourself up for more creativity, because you're always trying to open the door for future betterment, right? You're trying to do that, which I think is essentially the reason we would say these people have a destiny, or they have a calling, or they to do art or be that. And I don't know if it's a calling, or if it's them just trying to become who they really are supposed to be. It's this, and it feels like destiny then, because it's self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
You're building it so much that it becomes this, that it's not the world writing that destiny, but it's you.
It's you. And see, now you have Rogers, the actualizing tendency. Now you've got that incredible fiction writer, Adler. That construction of a lifestyle, or style of life is a term that he used. By age 4, we're already creating this fiction, this goal, and we're beginning to script ourselves in that direction. And that's our fate.
Mm-hmm.
We're making a fate.
And that's doesn't make it less magical.
No.
Maybe it makes it more.
I think it makes it more.
Because if some divine deity isn't doing it, and we are, then we have to accept the responsibility of us being a divine deity.
Yeah.
And which to the Christian tradition, Jesus was the Son of God, but we're all God's children, which puts us in alignment with Him to some degree. That statement alone says, oh, no, we're here. I'm doing as much as I can. What are you doing?
Yeah.
Judge for yourself, which then, for me, takes it back to the humanistic vibe of saying, all of our goal is to do this, not this. This is anybody, but this. And then you can be free to become the best you can be. And accept that. And not have to compete.
And accept the human is that curve.
Yes.
Not that spot on.
And work towards understanding that most people are in the gray. They're not good or bad, they just are.
And some of us are freaks.
Right. Some of us dance a little bit over here so that we can really come over here, right?
Back to the very beginning. What name do we call? Freak is a name I've been called a lot.
Do we own it or not?
And that's it.
Well, here's the thing. Being called a freak by a square, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate you and your acknowledgement that I'm very different than you. And I would agree to this. But when you're in the group of freaks, you're normal.
Yeah.
Which then indicates normal is just bullshit. It depends on where you are. Like, I always have students who come to me like, oh, I feel like, this is going on in my life. This is going on, whatever. I said, before you live that you're not good enough or any of those things, before you embody that, ask yourself if you're in a room of assholes. Because if you're in a room of assholes, that says more about them than you.
Yeah.
And you don't need to change, right? You just need to embrace yourself and be moved towards being less insecure in the moment, where you can withstand them saying that and say, no, I still love me. I still think I'm on that path. In a non-narcissistic way. It feels narcissistic when you say that because it kind of sounds that way.
Yeah.
But how we know is narcissism is coming from a purely insecure place. This is coming from an aim to be secure.
This is confidence,
Right.
fidelity, trueness to the self. That's confidence.
And it's where we should be aimed.
That's where we should be aimed.
Yeah. We'll probably hit a stopping point, I feel like.
I think we're at it.
And I think my dog's trying to tell me.
Your dog certainly.
Stop.
Yes.
100%. It's time for me to eat. Shut up. Move on. You'll do this again, so you don't have to do it all today. I will make a comment on if you saw me writing what I was writing. So in the videos, I'm going to try to tag thinkers or writers or books that we mention. So I'm trying to make a note because we don't have anybody else. It's literally the two of us. And if I'm honest, the technical side of it's just me.
Not shit.
And so I'm trying to keep notes real time to some degree of what was said so that I can put it in there for all of you if you're interested in looking up something further or what have you. But yeah, thank you. I'll let you close it out. Creativity. What do you think they should do?
Well, I like this idea. Maybe some shared texts out there that I'm going to invite you all to read Walter Benjamin's Storyteller.
Ooh, that's a good one. You invited me a long time ago.
Yeah, and that's it. And it's one I come back to.
It's a good one.
And if you like that one, then there's a crankier one by him that I'm thinking about a whole bunch called On Language as Such and on the Language of Men. And I'll leave it with that. That's it.
All right. I like it. Also, if you decide to be creative and write a poem or something like that, feel free to write your poem on the thread of the video and share it. We would love to read it. Maybe. Yeah, right? So do that. And thank you. Thank you if you're watching this again, and we'll keep doing them because we like to. Have a good day.
Be careful out there.